Hi, Barbara. So exciting that you get to be first. Phyllis, we're going to dedicate our learning for your refuah shlema. You should have a complete healing. Hi, Lorette. No, first of all, the classes are recorded, okay, Phyllis? So you can always watch them after. They're recorded on Facebook and they're recorded on YouTube. Patrice, my lucky friend. Well, she's related to a lucky person. Hi, Patrice. I miss you. I miss everybody. And Phyllis, you really should have a complete healing and take a lot of rest and get well. And I can send you some sites where you could read stories online to entertain yourself and keep quiet. Hi, Jill in Palm Springs, where I want to be. And Sturny, hi. Okay, we can start. Yerushalayim is now checked in. Sarah Lydia in Yerushalayim on lockdown once more. I think we're on lockdown too, but nobody locks themselves down. I just want to say for anybody that's not getting out, hi Miranda, how are you? Oh, good, yay, I'm so happy. Shabbat shalom to everybody. It was such a gorgeous day yesterday and today that my son Kobe and I, yesterday we went to the Venice canals walking, and it was just such a treasure. And today we went to the beach, and it was absolutely gorgeous. So I want to encourage anybody, since the rains in California, I know Sarah Lydia in Yerushalayim will have to look out her window and think she's seeing us, and we'll think we're seeing her. But since the rains, hi Jonathan, it's just been absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. And so we went, Kobe and I were at the beach today. And yeah, so I have beach energy, so let's start, okay? So I want to dedicate the class tonight to, tonight is the yahrzeit of one of my dear friends who lives in Jerusalem. Her grandmother, Rachel Bat Benjamin, very appropriate because he's one of the 12 tribes. Halevi, tonight is her yahrzeit, and also a yahrzeit, Louise Bas Bracha, my wonderful neighbor, her mother, and she was my annex. You know, for many years when I moved into this house in Mar Vista, where I've been living for about, hi Karen, for about 25 years, and I had many of my children living at home, and we always had lots of guests. My beloved neighbor down the street, Janet, turned her home into an annex for me. Hi, Boker Tov, Jeff from Yerushalayim. We have a few Yerushalayim people that get up early. So Janet, it was her mother, her wonderful mother's yahrzeit, and so I wanted to acknowledge that also. And I also want to wish everybody, I know a few people who are watching now, I want to wish everybody a refuah shlema, a complete healing, and anybody who's not watching, and anybody that we know and we don't know, everybody should have a complete healing, and it should be a time of oneness and connectedness, and we'll see in some of the things we're going to learn today that we're being asked to really increase our love and care for each other. Okay, so I want to start off this week's Parsha, this week's Torah reading, and then we have a few good stories interspersed. This week's Torah reading is Parsha Vayechi. It is the last Parsha in the book of Bereshit. So next week we're going to be starting Parsha Shmos. And at the end of this Parsha, we say we're giving blessings for strengthening. So it's an exciting Parsha. The whole book of Bereshit was exciting. And here we go for a little teaching about today's Parsha. So if you have a Torah scroll and you're going to look into a Torah scroll, you'll notice that usually between the end of one Parsha and another Parsha, there's a space, there are empty spaces. And I think we talked about it. One of the previous classes, we talked about how things look when the Parshas end and begin in a Torah scroll. So it says that the purpose of the open spaces, interestingly enough, was to allow Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our holy Rebbe, who was dictated to and taught the Torah by God, that he could take a pause between one parsha and another and reflect and contemplate on what that parsha and internalize what that parsha had been teaching, the laws and lessons that he had just learned. And also for the Torah readers in our times to have a break and know where to begin and where to stop. And it's a little harder to locate the point where you begin the parsha if there's no space between the two parshas. So it says this book, Parsha Vayechi, the last book of the Torah of Bereshis, is closed off, meaning there's no space, no empty space between where the last parsha ends and where this parsha begins. And it says this is explained by our sages. It's called like God closing off. And what does the closing off mean? It means that it's related to the closing off that we will not know, and we do not know the date that Mashiach, the Messiah, will arrive. And this is something that Yaakov, we're going to be talking about Jacob, our father, Yaakov, in this week's Parsha. This is something he wanted to reveal to his children, but it didn't happen. It says he was not able to reveal when, hi Stephanie, when the end of days will be coming. And there is a message from all of this that the fact that there's no spaces, the fact that there's no pause, there's a very deep message in this for us. So sometimes we don't understand the final end. We don't get to see, really what happens down the line or the final content. I think I've talked in this class before, maybe more than once. I told the story of my husband at Woodstock, and many years later having the head of the band sit in our house, and they met, and that my husband was the person who had inspired him really to change his life. Like, what are the chances he would be sitting right there in your house? So we don't always get to see that. Sometimes it's a gift when we get to see something like that, but it's not often. And often we have a lot of questions and we have a lot of doubts about what happens to us and what we're seeing, because we only see what's in front of us. And it says that things are very hidden, things are concealed, and we see in our whole Torah teaching what is revealed and then what is concealed. And what is the Torah then saying? It's saying here, you would think that we're coming to the end of the book of Genesis, and we're coming to the last Parsha, and you think that this last Parsha would end with like a bang, like something very uplifting and powerful. And it says that because we have the book of creation, we have the story of creation, we have all the matriarchs, we have all the patriarchs in this. But what does the Torah say at the end? It says Yosef died at the end of 110 years. They embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So that's kind of a strange ending to the book of Genesis, that the whole book of Bereshis has such extraordinary depth and description. And now, like one of the people we love and we've grown so close to, one of the people that, hi Myrna, is that Yosef died and he was placed in a coffin. And this is the conclusion of the book of Bereshis. But we're told that this is not a sad ending. And it says, in fact, there's a lot of promise, divine providence, and a lot of divine providence in the way that this Parsha ends. And it says that, hi Stella, I'm just going to have to just stop every now and then and be friendly, because we're going to learn a lot about Ahavas Israel, love of our fellow Jew, in this Parsha. So I'm going to just start right off and just be friendly to whoever is watching. So it says that what happens in the future for the Jewish nation because of Yosef dying and being embalmed and being placed in a coffin and being placed in the Nile River. It says that just like we know that this is a closed Parsha and things are hidden And at the time when the event occurred, we don't get to know what's going to go on into the future, and we cannot understand what's happening. Let's see, let me think of an example. Oh, now, what's going on now? There is no way to understand it, absolutely no way to understand it. So it says, only with patience in studying the Parsha do we learn that many years later, when the Jews were ready to leave Egypt, that Moshe Rabbeinu goes to the Nile River and he draws up the casket of Yosef to take with him to be buried in Israel. And it said he was placed in the Nile in order to afford a blessing to the Nile, because that is the way the Nile irrigated. The river banks of the Nile would overflow and they would irrigate the land, and that is how the people were sustained, through the richness of the soil being irrigated from the Nile. And it says, but then they took Yosef out. As the Jews were going out of Egypt, Yosef was taken with them, Yosef's body for burial in Israel. And so the Jews then, what happened? They were standing at the Red Sea, and the Egyptians were behind them, and there was nowhere that they could go. And miraculously, it says, God parted the sea. But why did it split? What was the motivating factor for the sea to split? And it said it split in Yosef's merit. So we learn in a sefer called Midrash Tenchuma, which I have to say, when I was a student in Yerushalayim with Rabbi Goldstein at Diaspora Yeshiva, this was the class that he taught, and it was always like the most exciting class of the week. And it says the sea saw and fled. What did it see that the sea fled? It says that it saw the coffin of Yosef. And the Torah tells us that Yosef, when he was tempted by the wife of Potiphar, that he fled. He got up and he fled. And in recognition and to remember this act, measure for measure, it says the sea split. It's like it fled. And how did it flee? It split. So it says that the whole fact that Yosef passed in Egypt and he was buried there and he was taken out and laid to rest and then taken back to Eretz Yisrael with the Jews, he saved the Jewish nation because the sea split in his merit. And again, it's coming to teach us that we don't understand many things that happen, and we're seeing events then, and we're seeing events now that look just like sadness and tragedy. But it says that this is the way they look to us, and this is the way they appear, because many things in life are hidden. Many things are concealed. You know, it says that there are two types of love. There's ahavas olam and ahavas rabbah. And it says one is open love and one is concealed love. And it says that we need to have patience. That's a tough one. We want it now. We want to be freed now. We want to see Mashiach now. We want to have the sadness over, and we want to see the rejoicing and the celebration. And we have to understand and wait that there is a plan, and there is a plan, and we don't always see everything. And I just want to make one more comment about Yosef. So Yosef was taken, and he was buried in Shechem, in the city of Shechem in Israel. And I had the really great privilege. I really can't tell you how many years ago, but I'm sure there's going to be some scholar that's watching this tonight. Many, many years ago, before the first Intifada, my husband and I went with the Wolfsons from Bat Ayan, hi Fran, that we went to Shechem to go to visit the grave of Yosef and be able to pray there. And I have to say, even though the Intifada had not started, always in Israel, people have to understand, Israel was always under attack, and Israel was always being threatened, and it just escalated and escalated, but times were always precarious. And at that time, the only way you could get to Shechem is that you could drive your car in the Shomron, and you could go to a certain kiosk, and you could leave your car there, and then there were buses, bulletproof buses that would meet you there. There was a schedule, maybe twice a day, 3 times a day, and they would take you into the Shechem, into the yeshiva of actually Rabbi Ginsburg, and you should be blessed. Yitzhak Fivish ben Brina Malka should continue to heal and have a refuah shlema, and also Baruch ben Leah. And so this bus would take you right to the door of the yeshiva of it's called Od Yosef Chai, into the yeshiva where the tomb of Yosef was. And the bus traveled through the city, and what happened during this time, since the 6-Day War, is that city just grew and grew and grew and grew. It was allowed to just be populated by the Arab population, and it was a very big population. And it was not a friendly city. And so when the bus would stop, and the door of the bus would stop right by the door of the yeshiva. And the bus was surrounded by a lot of very hostile-looking people. Many of them were armed because that was their protection for their police in their city. And Shlomo and I got off the bus, and we went in there, and I have to say it was probably one of the most peaceful places that I have ever felt in the land of Israel. It was something that was so remarkable and so magical about being in there. And you go into the yeshiva, and then you go into an inner room where the tomb of Yosef is, and we stayed for 5 hours, and I just lay against the kever, lay against the tomb, and I really felt this very deep, deep, deep sense of peace in being there. So now it is not accessible openly. I think people do go in one big group maybe once a month. I'm not even sure of that. It is certainly a challenge to be there, even though it's our land and our holy, righteous tzaddik that we look up to and we're inspired by. And hopefully one day very soon that we'll be back there again. So I want to do a few different teachings from the Parsha. Every Parsha is so rich and so full, and I really tried to do 1 or 2 pieces of it with a little more depth than is available in just a regular Chumash. But I really encourage everybody, either before Shabbos or on Shabbos, to really read the Parsha, because we learn from the Alter Rebbe, it says, live with the times. And what's live with the times? It means to live with the Torah reading of the week. And I'll just say that this week coming up is my son Shmuel Asher's birthday is on Shabbos, and my son Kobe's birthday is on Monday. And Monday is also the yard site of the Rambam. And when my son Kobe was born, his name is Yaakov. Now, his name is Yaakov because this was the Parsha where we talked about Yaakov. And he was born in Parsha Shmos. And the Torah reading for the day that he was born was about Yaakov. And it was also the Hilula, the yard site of Yaakov Abukatsara. And he's named for a very beloved friend of mine whose name was Yaakov Goldfarb. And his brother Ruvain lives in Sfat, in the holy city of Sfat. And tragically, Yaakov Goldfarb was murdered. And I really wanted to name my child after him, but I didn't know if, from when I grew up, the little bit of Judaism I was given was some of the, like, don't ever name a child after somebody who died young or somebody who was murdered. So I really wanted to name him for Yaakov because I didn't think there would ever be anybody else that would be named for him. And so I really didn't know what to do. And the divine providence was so clearly his name, because he was born on the Parsha where the day of the Parsha, the Aliyah, the Torah reading for that day spoke about Yaakov, and he was born on the yortzeit of a very holy, righteous person, Yaakov Abed Katzera, who maybe next week I will tell a story about. So we want to learn the Torah. I encourage everybody to keep up with the Torah reading because that's what it means to live with the times. Okay. So it says, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt, and one of the commentators is saying that he spent the best years of his life in Egypt. So it says that we know that his life was full of difficulties and problems. And Egypt, he was able to live in wealth and prosperity. He went when his son was the ruler of Egypt. So he was able to live with a very different lifestyle than he was able to live before he went into Egypt. And it says that also his final years, he was with all his sons. He was able to share his wisdom with all his sons, and these were the best years of his life. So the question is asked, this is a very typical question, asked, how were these the best years of his life spent in Egypt? Because Egypt, we know, was a depraved land. It was a land of spiritual darkness. And how was his fulfillment here instead of Eretz Yisrael, where he lived up till this time in the Holy Land? Why was it this way? So the commentaries are suggesting something that's talked about in the Zohar, which is the book of Kabbalah and mysticism. It says, there's a verse, and it says, I saw an advantage to light over darkness. And the Zohar is explaining that it is through darkness that it is possible to attain a higher quality of light. Why? Because the existence of the world is maintained through godly life energy. Everything radiates with divine light. Everything radiates with divine energy. And even things that look spiritually empty have sparks of godliness in them. And it says sometimes the godly energy that's in what looks empty is more powerful than where holiness is openly revealed. So it says, how can the godliness in these things be trapped? And then how can we use them? How can we release them and use them? So it says, Jacob saw no difference between his life in Egypt and his life in the land of Israel. The externals for sure were different. They were not the same. In Egypt, he lived among affluence and security and with all his family. And in the Holy Land, in Israel, he struggled. Hi, everybody, Ora and Shirley. He struggled with foes, and Israel was holy and Egypt was corrupt, but internally, in his inner being, in his essence, he saw no change. His life was the same. His life was steady. His life was committed. His life went forward. And there was a deep commitment to Torah that he never lost, that he always kept. And even in Egypt, it says that this was his focus. His focus was to live a Torah life, and that he and his descendants would be able to do this, even in the darkness of Egypt. Hi, Lisa. So it says, through these efforts, he was able to tap into the spiritual potential that was deeply hidden within the darkness of Egypt. And he was able to bring a higher quality of light to the surface. And therefore, he was able to generate the potential for the exodus of Egypt. And then what do we have after the exodus of Egypt? The redemption. So that is a little about Yaakov being able to be the same, being able, it's like going on vacation. When you go on vacation, you still say Moda Ani in the morning. Maybe you don't have to set your alarm and go to work or go to school, but you acknowledge that God gave your soul back to you. And there are the morning prayers that you say, whether you're at home, on vacation, in a foreign land, in a difficult situation. So all these things that internally we can maintain who we are in every situation. And the externals might change, but the internals can be maintained, especially if they're internals going in the proper way. And we learn this from Jacob, from Yaakov, our forefather, who is buried in the holy city of Hebron. So in this week's Parsha, and actually I think it was today's Torah reading, today is Wednesday. So the Chumash is divided up into 7 different parts for the 7 days of the week and the 7 people that are called to the Torah. And in today's Wednesdays, it is the blessings that Yaakov is giving to each of his sons. And we're going to concentrate on 1 or 2 of them today. And so let's start. So it says when Jacob blessed his son Asher, and I picked Asher because my grandfather was Asher. And my son, whose birthday this Shabbos, when this Torah portion will be read, his name is Shmuel Asher. So I picked the piece of Torah that talks about the gifts that were given in the name and the teaching that we have from Asher. It says, from Asher, his food shall be fat. His bread shall be fat. So Rashi is explaining this means that he will have an abundance of olive oil. Now, one of the things we've learned from Hanukkah and learning about the menorah that was lit in the temple, that olive oil is the finest of all oils. And for anybody who is newly keeping kosher or oldly keeping kosher, that virgin pure olive oil actually does not need a kosher symbol on it because it is all 100% kosher. So it says that the food that will come from the territory of Asher will be fat because there will be numerous olive trees in his territory and it will flow with oil like a fountain. I just want to share an experience that I had in Hebron one year. I was staying in the community of what's called Tel Rameda, which was the grounds of King David's palace. The palace of King David was 7 years in Hebron before it was in Jerusalem. And Baruch Marzel, who is a legendary figure in Hebron and in Israel, so Baruch Marzel said to me, do you want me to take you on a special walk? I was going to the Marat Machpelah, to where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rivka, and Leah are buried. I was going there to pray. And he said, I'll take you in a different way. And he took me through an ancient grove of olive trees that he said that this was the oldest grove in all of Eretz Israel. And there were hundreds of trees. And I can't begin to tell you the specialness and the feeling of being there was really just, the gnarled bark and the trunk of the trees and the way the olive trees stood and formed. And you could just feel the generations. It was something very, very special. So it says, Moses blessed the tribe of Asher in a like manner. And he said, and he will dip his foot in oil. I think I chose this teaching because I like going to the spa where they put a lot of oil on you. So, hi, Cindy. So it says that everything that's physical has a spiritual counterpart. And really the spiritual reality is the cause for what we have in physicality, for the emergence of the counterparts in the physical realm. So it says, all that is in heaven and in earth, you will find everything God has created in heaven, he also created on earth. So there's a reflection on earth. And it says that if this is the case with worldly matters, how much more so about everything that is talked about in the Torah? And everything in Torah must have a spiritual reality. And every detail has multiple levels on which we can understand it. There's the Peshat, the plain meaning, the Remez, the alluded meaning, the Drush, which is allegorical, and the Sod, which is the mystical meaning. So it says that these four form what we call the Pardes, and the Pardes are 4 levels of meaning and interpretation of how we interpret the Torah. And it says that everything we learn, that every line has to be valid on all 4 levels. Just like I am drawn to this, I like the mystical level. That's what I'm drawn to. But it also has to be true on the simple level. It can't be, you can't like just decide I want to take this understanding and not this understanding. They're all intertwined. They're all true. So it says a verse does not depart from its plain meaning. So here we have this blessing from Asher that we talked about in the beginning. From Asher, his bread shall be fat, and he will dip his foot in olive oil. So there was an abundance of olive trees in the portion of land that was Asher's in a physical sense. So there has to be a spiritual meaning to what that abundance of olive and olive trees were in his land. So spiritually speaking, oil alludes to chachma, which is wisdom. And wisdom is contained in the intellect, in the brain, which is the highest part of a person. And what is foot? A foot is the lowest part of a person. And it says he will dip his foot in oil. And it indicates that the foot is making use of the oil, so that the lowest part is making use of the wisdom, which is the highest part. The implication here is that the foot, even though it's externally the lowest level, has a virtue that is inaccessible even to the level of wisdom, even to the level of the highest level that oil represents. And this is why the foot is so necessary, because it must utilize the oil, that the wisdom cannot utilize the oil in the same way. So we know when we're talking about the Messianic era, it says, on that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. So again, oil signifies wisdom, and olives are the source of oil. And the Mount of Olives is even loftier, for that's where the olives grow out of, the soil of the Mount of Olives. And it signifies an exalted level. And it says, on that day, his feet, meaning the Mashiach's feet, will stand on the Mount of Olives, which means that even then the feet are higher because they're standing on the land. That's the Mount of Olives. So in terms of a person's spiritual avoda, their spiritual work, oil wisdom signifies the study of Torah and the observance of doing the commandments of mitzvahs, which is motivated by the intellectual understanding and the delight in learning. And the aspect of foot, that has to do with wisdom. But the aspect of foot, the foot being dipped in the oil, has to do with what we call Kabbalas Ol. So we've talked about Kabbalas Ol many times in class, and Kabbalas Ol is wearing the yoke of heaven, just like when you have oxen and you put a yoke around their neck, and that yoke prevents their head from turning in either direction. So they only can go forward. They can only see and do what's ahead of them. So this is what we're talking about, Kabbalas Ol, and we'll go on to explain it. So you would think that maybe it would be an inferior level because you're being yoked and you can only go in one direction and you're not using your intellect or your decision making or your choices at all. There's no real personal choice and delight in which aspect you're studying and learning or enthusiasm. But this spiritual work, this avoda that's based on Kabbalas Ol, has an advantage over the spiritual work that comes from intellect, reason, mind, and understanding, which we will explain. So it says in the physical realm, which we know reflects the spiritual realm, because everything in the physical has a reflection in the spiritual. feet have an advantage over the head because feet lend completion and wholeness to the head. So the tribe of Asher was included in the camp of Dan. So the tribes of Israel, when they traveled in the desert, following the Exodus from Egypt, they were divided into 4 camps of 3 tribes each. The camp of Judah was the tribes of Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The camp of Reuven was the tribes of Reuven, Shimon, and Gad. The camp of Ephraim were the tribes of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And the camp of Dan with the tribes of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. And they traveled in this order always, with the tribe of Levi that was separate, and that was subdivided into 3 families, the families of Gershon, the families of Kehath, and the family of Merari. And the wagons were in the center, and the camp of Dan was in the rear. So the significance of the camp and its position will help us understand the advantage of foot over the head and the connection between the virtue of the foot and the tribe of Asher. Hi, Hindelanger in San Francisco. So the camp of Dan was the one who gathered everything belonging to all the camps. It's like the mother who travels after the kids and they're dropping their clothes and you're picking them up. It says they gathered all the lost objects together. And it marched in the rear of all the camps and was able to find anything that was lost by the preceding camps, and they were able to give it back to the owners. In other words, it says they marched in the rear. Now, the rear, most people don't want to be in the rear. You want to be in the front. You know, like if you're going to some rock concert, you don't want to be in the rear. You want to really get right in that front row. So people think of the rear as an inferior rank compared to the others, like the aspect of foot. You think your foot is not as relevant as your head. Nevertheless, for this reason, because it was in the rear, it was able to restore to all the other tribes and camps what they lost, anything that was lost. So all aspects of the physical realm come from, again, have a counterpart in the spiritual. We need to remember that, that there's something else going on always. So it says that the concept of loss by our sages is expressed in the following way. It says, who is a fool? One who loses what's called their ma, meaning what, their whatness, what is given to them. It says, according to Chassidus, that every Jew is given a certain potency of what are we, of what importance are we, of what is. And what is this? It's the potential to stand in self-negation before God. What does that mean? It means that we have the ability to move ourselves over to do the will of God. That what our being can have this feeling of making space, making room for God in our life. And it says that the potential, the Yetzer Hara, which is the evil, negative inclination, and it's referred to in many texts as an old and stupid king, a fool, might cause one to lose this, might, trick you into desiring something that might even go against the will of God. And it says, and it is this loss that was found and restored to the different camps by the tribe of Dan, who gathered in everything that was lost that belonged to all the camps. So the camps that were in the front were closest, and they went closer in proximity to the sanctuary. And it says that even for the tribe of Levi and even for the family of Kehas, there remained the possibility of losing themselves, of letting their Yetzer Hara take over and not be able to have this quality of self-negation before God, before godliness, not be able to make room for God. And it says the camp of Dan alone, that was the aspect of foot. Remember, the foot being the furthest back, the lowest level, so to speak, would keep the soul aspect of that quality of what are we, of what importance are we intact. And they were able to even to restore that quality and give back that ability to have self-negation to all the other tribes and all the other camps. Cheryl, hi. We have so many people from so many interesting places. We have Israel and Jerusalem, and we have Oregon and New York and Florida and Minnesota, and I can go Mexico. I saw a friend from Mexico. So, yeah, I'd like to go to all those places. I'm just letting everybody know that you can send me an invitation, and I will at some point be visiting. So it says then, the feet complete and perfect the head. So the same idea is implied in another verse, and it's in this week's Parsha, and it says, Dan shall judge. So the Gemara is telling us, a certain person used to say, judge my case. So that way we know he was descended from the tribe of Dan, because we know that Dan was given the ability to judge. So what does it mean, judge my case? It's referring to a person who wants to know what is the proper conduct. How do I behave according to the code of Jewish law, regardless of how insignificant my question might be? So it says that the world is not lawless, and Torah has directives for even the most minute detail. Even how you put your shoes on in the morning, we're taught in the Torah. I just remember a funny story. Rabbi Manis Friedman, who some of you might know and many of you might not, but he has a lot of classes on Chabad.org and on YouTube, and he's a wonderful Tanya teacher, and he happens to be really the first teacher who really taught me Hasidus, the first person, and he's the person who introduced me to my husband. So I'm a very big fan of Rabbi Friedman, and I remember he once was telling a story, and he said that he lived and lives in Minnesota, and he came home from the airport like at 2 a.m, and in Minnesota, probably on a crowded day, the streets might not be that crowded. And he said it was the middle of the night, and he was driving home, and there was not a car to be seen in his whole trip home. And he went through, I think, a red light or a stop sign, and he was pulled over by a police person. And the police person said to him, the first thing he said to him is, "Don't you believe in obeying the laws?" And Rabbi Freeman started to laugh when he was telling the story, because he said his whole life is lived by laws. You know, like every detail of his life is lived by laws, the 613 commandments. Okay, I guess going through a red light might not have been one of the commandments. So everything is detailed. Every minute detail is talking to us. So where does this come from? Where does it come from, this following all the laws? This approach comes from the concept that we were talking before of Kabbalah's ol, wearing the yoke of heaven. Because we know in Torah, we can say that one mitzvah is one commandment, one mitzvah is a light commandment, and another is the most severe commandment. But truly, from the perspective of Kabbalah's ol, they're all the same. The lightest and the most severe are equal because they're all decrees from God. So, and we really don't know what's the most important or what's the least important. We don't know the value of a mitzvah, but they're all Kabbalah Soul. We're doing them all because they're decrees from God. My birthday is coming up in a few weeks. And I hope Mashiach comes so I could be in Israel or Bali. Take your pick. But I every year on your birthday, on your Hebrew birthday, you're supposed to make what's called a hachlata, a new resolution. And for many years, every year, I would make the same resolution, which I should be embarrassed to say, but I'm not embarrassed to say because I think I finally conquered it. But for many years, I would say to give, there is a formula for giving tzedakah, for giving charity. But it doesn't take away from the fact that a person should be giving tzedakah every single day. So it doesn't have to be those big checks every day, but it should be at least a coin of day. And that's an easy mitzvah. Nothing that much is being asked of you. You don't have to go to a certain store and buy a certain food and, clean out your oven and throw out your bread. All you have to do is take a penny and put it in a little charity box every day except Shabbos and holidays and give that coin for tzedakah. And I always thought, gosh, what an easy mitzvah. Well, I took on that hachlata for my birthday for year after year after year because I never got it right. Maybe being stuck home because of COVID, and I'm in my house all the time mostly. I don't forget. But because it was so easy, because it was an easy mitzvah, I tread on it. I didn't take it possibly as seriously as I should have. So it says the way we serve God and the way we take on mitzvahs comes from this quality of Kabbalah's all. So it says that the camp of Dan, that they were in particular, their practice had to do with Kabbalah's all. And it says that on the surface, you might think, or one might think, that this is an inferior way to serve God because there's no personal understanding, there's no personal decision-making, there's no personal enthusiasm. You're just doing what you are supposed to do. But in essence, it says Kabbalah's all transcends the intellectual approach, transcends reason and understanding in the following way. One, human intellect is limited, and we know that God is infinite. And we are trying to take infinity and grasp it with a finite mind, and that's just not going to happen. It says, according to the Zohar, about God, you are the highest of the highest and the mystery of all mysteries, and no thought can grasp you at all. That the intellect cannot grasp the concept of godliness. We can attempt, we can try. Meditation is very powerful in trying to expand, to push out the borders, the boundaries of our mind. But when we're serving God that's based on reason, it says one grasps divinity in a limited way, which is restricted to the limitation of the intellect. And Kabbalah's all, on the other hand, means a total submission and commitment to God because God is infinite. And I told this story many times. I'm not going to bore you with my story of my coat in Israel. Again, that was shotness. But hi Amelie, but I had a coat and my intellect could not grasp the concept of shotness, which is not to mix wool and linen together in the same garment. And it was winter in Jerusalem and it was a fake fur coat, and I was told that fake fur are known to have woolen and linen. It wasn't fur, it was a material. It was one of those fluffy materials. And that I should have it checked. And my reason and intellect thought that this is I hate to say it, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, what are you talking about? And I'm not going to do it. And because my intellect couldn't grasp that there is a level of commandments maybe that I don't understand, and I'm never going to understand. But I never could wear it until I had it checked, even though I wasn't going to do it, but I never wore it. And in the end, it was okay. But the Kabbalas Ol is committing to God. It's like eventually I understood I want a certain level of relationship. I want a certain connection to God. And there are certain things that are just beyond my level of understanding. And in the way I began my own practice and study, is I eventually put those things to the side, to take them out and examine them and look at them later on. And I committed myself to a certain level of Kabbalas Ol, of just moving forward, having my eye on the goal. And the goal was to have a connection and a relationship with God and godliness. And it says the next reason is Kabbalas Ol not only transcends the intellect by trying to reach more sublime heights, but it's the foundation of any form of spiritual practice, including the practice based on reason, mind and reason. Because when one submits to God, even through your intellect, even through your reason and your mind and your understanding, you're creating a total unity. You're creating a unity with divinity, and that ultimately has its foundation and its basis in what we call Kabbalas Ol, is that yoke of heaven. And because we can't build our divine service, our godly service, on intellect alone. And it says that this Kabbalas Ol is a prerequisite for intellect to function properly. And it says in Torah, based on the Zohar, that if this acceptance of the yoke of heaven is not found within a person, then holiness cannot rest on that person. And that there are many paths into the Torah. It says there are 70 different paths into the Torah. I like the path of holiness. It speaks to me. It draws me. Many people have different things that draw them, but if this is the path that I want to take, then I have to understand how to wear that yoke of heaven and to move forward in that direction, that with my eye on that prize of being united with that level of holiness. So now we go on to understand further why what we're talking about in the beginning of this Sikha, why the camp of Dan marched at the rear, being the one that gathered in all for the different camps. So it says that there are 3 reasons. Number 1, that the spiritual work of the tribe, of the camp of Dan, which was made up of the 3 tribes that we said before, of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali, was Kabbalas Ol, which on the external level looks like the lower level. You're just like going along. You're not using your higher intellect. You're not using your higher understanding. And what is the lower level is the feet. So it says that just like their spiritual level on the surface, not in reality, but on the surface in the way it looked, was at the rear, was at the lowest level, that was where their physical positioning was. They were the furthest in the back. They had the back row seats. So it says, however, by virtue of this level of self-negation, which is, again, making room for God, moving yourself over to make room for God, that is implicit in serving God with Kabbalas Ol. It says the camp of Dan sacrificed their personal interests in order to be the one who gathered in for all the camps, even for the stragglers and the tardy. And they did this even though it caused them to be a great distance away from the sanctuary. In fact, they were at the very rear, the very back. So it goes on to say, for the one who is in this state of self-negation, which is the foundation really of Kabbalas Ol, is not serving themselves. That their entire being is fulfilling the supernal will, And their themselves is not what matters to them. Their sole concern is to reveal the will of God. And thus they are prepared and accepting to be far away from the sanctuary, in fact, in the very rear, so long as they can fulfill this supreme will by drawing another closer to God. You know, this is really the foundation of Chabad houses. This is the foundation of the vision of the Lubavitcher Rebbes in sending emissaries far away from that heartbeat, far away from the center, far away from their Rebbes, far away from where they might be able all day long to be only involved in holiness, and sending them into the trenches and into the fields. And this is fulfilling the will of God, is the tribe of Dan restoring and regaining and gathering everything that was lost. So it says that the feet are the foundation for the total structure, and the feet support the head. And so also the camp of Dan was supported, the Kabbalah's all was sustained and was the foundation for all the spiritual work that was done, even for the intellect. So now we have another directive in our spiritual service, in our spiritual work, in our spiritual avoda. So it says one can study Torah and perform mitzvahs on the most exalted level, being at the closest proximity to the sanctuary and the ark. But it says simultaneously that person could be thinking only of their own personal benefit, their own personal, how lucky they are to be where they are, and devoid of any sense of kindness to another. It says this self-concern may even be of a spiritual nature. A person can be doing it for their own spiritual purpose, for their own spiritual growth. And it says that even for their own spiritual development and welfare, but they lack the basic principle of the entire Torah. And what is the basic principle? Love your fellow like yourself. And it might cause them, being so concerned with their own spiritual practice and growth, might cause them to lose that whatness, that level of their soul. It might cause them to lose something. Many years ago, when I used to go to New York, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe was in 770 in Crown Heights, and there would be a Farbrengen, and there would be thousands of people there, and you personally want to see the Rebbe. The Rebbe was inspiring to see with your own eyes, and to really have that personal inspiration. And sometimes people would come, like early in the morning, and they would just stay all day in their seats, in their rows, and it was very hard for other people to see because they didn't want to move. But there were always many people, not just a few, who might have been there and might have been reserving seats all day and be in the front. And they would I remember being drawn in so many times. And I can even name the names of the people. I won't at the moment, but really name the names of the people who move themselves out of the way. So not only me, but other people could come and could see and could be inspired. It wasn't about them. It was about opening up that experience for other people. So it says that only one who devotes themselves to Ahavas Israel, love of your fellow Jew, with self-sacrifice. Now, I see Hinda Langer, the Chabad Rebbetzin from San Francisco, is here, and she taught me a song that we used to sing in her Chabad house when we used to visit, to love a fellow Jew. I'm not going to sing it publicly, even though I know everybody's probably clamoring for it. But it goes, to love a fellow Jew who's just the same as you is the message in our Holy Torah. She may be far from me, across the wide blue sea, but still I will love her all the same. For 70 or 80 years, a neshama, a soul, wears or tears just to do a favor for another. So our whole purpose in coming into this world and to be in a place could be just to do one favor for another. That's how important this quality of Ahavas Yisrael is. So it says that and we are guaranteed that we will remain intact, and we will also be able, like the tribe of Dan, the camp of Dan, to restore the spiritual losses of others. So it says this great quality that's achieved by this avoda, the spiritual work based on Kabbalah soul and self-sacrifice for Ahavas Yisrael, for love of a fellow Jew, is in the blessing for the tribe of Naphtali. Naphtali also was in the camp of Dan and also marched at the rear of the camp. And to Naphtali, it was said, Yam v'darom yarasha, the west and the south possess. Okay, we're going to go into this. This is the time everybody should put on their Kabbalah seatbelts. And we'll see how we are going to do with this part. So it says, the Gemara says that the Shekhinah, the presence of God, dwells in the west. And the west is one of the 4 points, hi Terry, on the compass. And it's limited in terms of space, just like the other points on the compass. But there is a greater manifestation of the divine presence in the west than in the other directions. And it says in the footnotes that the Shekhinah is everywhere. It can't be it's not limited to only one direction, but it says it manifests itself in one place more than in another. Now we're talking about the south, and it says that the sun's heat radiates more intensely in the south. Yes, I'm longing to be like in the hot south. I like that heart, Terry. Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody. I'm going to just take a hello, nice to see everybody break. Okay, that's it. It really is nice to see everybody. And somebody came over tonight, Stephanie, and for a moment to pick up the mug that now she's going to get 2 because I couldn't find it right away. But I said, I do feel like I see people, even people I might not know. I feel like I'm meeting you and seeing you. And I want to make a few commercials, announcements, but we're in the middle of this, so hopefully somebody will remind me when I finish this particular sikha. So it says the sun's heat radiates the most intensely in the south, and the sun symbolizes God, because it says, for a sun is the eternal, and the south transcends the west, and the west is the manifestation of divinity, which is referred to as the Shekhinah, which is the divine indwelling or immanence, which is confined within the categories of time and space. See, I told you, you need your Kabbalah seatbelts on for this now. And it says, west signifies the divine power as it dwells in and is subject to the bounds of time and space. The Shekhinah, it says the Shekhinah is in the west. The south is the manifestation of what we call the Shemesh Havaya, means the eternal aspect, the transcendent aspect of God. The sun is in that aspect, the transcendence of God, which is the past, the present, and the future as one. So, and that transcends both time and space. So in the 4-letter name of God, the Yud and the K and the Vav and the K, it says that it's made up of 3 words. He was, he is, and he will be. He was before all beings, he is all beings, and he will be after all beings. This is from the Zohar, and this indicates the timelessness or infinity or the transcendence of God. There's another level, and it's going on to teach us that this is the difference between an inheritance and a purchase or a gift. So in the case of a purchase, the purchaser pays money, and the significance and value of the object is reflected in the purchase price. When somebody is given a gift, a gratuitous gift, it says that probably if the donor would not derive some benefit, then they would not be giving the present. I was once asked by a teacher, this is very interesting. I have a friend who used to teach in New York State, and New York State has something called the New York State Regents, which are like major final exams at the end of the year, which are all uniform statewide, that are given in each subject. And if you don't pass, even if you were a straight A student during the year and you don't pass the Regent, you fail the course. There's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of anxiety. And I have a friend who is teaching a very complicated math course, a high school course. And then there was a Regent on it. And there was a girl in her class who failed the Regent. And this friend of mine said that that year, the Regent was the hardest of any year they had ever made it. And she would herself take the Regent when the girls were taking it. And she said it was not a fair reflection. This girl was an A student. She understood everything in the class. And she didn't know what to do because this girl's mother, it's my birthday son, Shmuel Asher Schwartz, and we're talking about the tribe of Asher. Shmuel Asher's birthday Shabbos. So everybody wants to sing happy birthday in your own homes. Go ahead. So this girl's mother had given my friend a beautiful gift, an end of the year gift. She gave her a beautiful pin. And the question my friend had for me was this, her friend, she was given this gift because she was a great teacher, and this mother appreciated it, and this mother was even a friend of hers. But now the dilemma was this. My friend really wanted to pass the girl on her Regents. She felt that she should not have failed it. She should not fail the course. She knew all the material perfectly. The Regent was very complicated and hard. But because she had received this gift, and the gift was, as it says here, a gift is given because the donor receives some benefit for giving the gift, even happiness. She didn't know what she should do in terms of passing her or not on the Regents because of the gift that she was given. Would it be considered bribery in some way? So if you stay till the very end of the class, I'll tell you what my advice was, which she followed. Okay. So it says there is a proportionate relationship between the gift and the benefit or pleasure the donor derives from the person the gift is given to. An inheritance, however, does not depend on the heir who receives it or the conditions. An inheritance is pure in itself, even to somebody at a very young age. And it says the same applies to spiritual matters. Purchase and a gift signify the manifestation of God's light, which is commensurate with each person's spiritual work, with the avoda, the spiritual avoda that a person does. What do they put into it? How much are they working on it? And it says a change in their avoda, their spiritual work, will affect a corresponding change in the manifestation of God's light that they're receiving in the world. However, inheritance applies to every Jew equally. It says, you are children of the eternal your God, which makes every single Jew an heir to the inheritance of godliness that God is putting out into the world. and it transcends the individual capacities of the recipient and is unlimited. This is equal access. We have an all access pass to backstage. If you've ever gone to any rock concerts and you wanted to get backstage, you need an all access pass. And that's what it's saying. So it's saying that this is attained by means of Kabbalah's Ol, which we've been talking about, and Mesiras Nefesh, and that level of self-sacrifice for Ahavas Yisrael, for loving your fellow Jew. And it says that a spiritual work that's based on mind and reason will only bring godliness to a limited degree, relative to the person's mind and their extent of their perception. But Kabbalah's Ol, doing the work of God, doing the yoke, going in the selfless, self-negation direction of God is infinite. An inheritance applies to all Jews. And it says this can be concealed. And it says that Kabbalah's Ol reveals what is concealed, and it brings it out into the open. So it says within the camp of Dan itself, the tribe of Asher was in the middle. You know, my husband used to always tell people, we always had like a lot of tables set up for Shabbos in the good old days, you know, and whoever was sitting in the middle of the table would be out of luck, because, you know, you're always asking them, can you pass this? Can you pass that? And he'd always say, be careful about sitting in the middle. So it says, as a rule, the middle one here, this is giving another perspective, and not the extremes on either side are prized. And it follows that the tribe of Asher, again, we're coming back to the tribe of Asher, is what's called Panemius Shebaregel, which means the depth of innerness, the essence of the aspect of foot. Just as the camp of Dan benefited all Jews in a general way, the tribe of Asher did the same in a particular way. And it is said of Asher, let him be acceptable to his brothers. And it said he supplied all the others with food in what we call the Shemitah year, in the sabbatical year. So the sabbatical year, for anybody who might not know, and I think it might be coming up soon, maybe if it's not, I don't think it's this year because we would have heard about it. It might even be coming next year. It's every 7 years. And the land of Israel has to lay and rest, meaning that it's a very difficult year for farmers and people growing crops, but we let the land not be plowed, not be picked, not be harvested. I don't know all the different laws of Shemitah. They're very, very specific and very, very detailed and fascinating, really. And you know, the fruits and vegetables are limited. What you can have of the fruits of the land of Israel are limited. When you go shopping in the United States, or if some of you from England, wherever you're from, and you're getting canned produce, you have to be aware that some of the fruits might have been canned in the year of Shemitah, and therefore they're prohibited to be eaten. The next year is Shemitah. Thank you, my scientist, my swim partner and scientist friend, Myrna. I knew she'd know the answer. Next year, starting 2021, does that mean, no, it must be next Rosh Hashanah. Or in the summer, right before Rosh Hashanah. Okay, it says, what special connection is there between the tribe of Asher and the sabbatical year? And the Torah says, and if you say, what shall we eat? It says that is going to be a question. And all the tribes will seem to be dependent on Asher. So the idea of the sabbatical year is explained as a year of rest for the land, with the having to do with labor of the land. You shall desist from the plowing and the harvesting, and all things that are related to human food must cease. And Scripture says that if you will say, what shall we eat? The answer is, I will command my blessing upon you. Meaning, don't worry. So the sabbatical year is serious, and there are certain forms of labor of the land that are not performed. And it says that there is a promise, I will command my blessing. Meaning, for example, it's not going to be in a supernatural way. For instance, like Moses ascended to heaven and he didn't eat or drink water. And it won't be that in the 6th year, the food will be so like zapped with power that you won't need to eat in the next year. Like there was the prophet Elijah who went on the strength of one meal for 40 days and nights. It's not going to be happening. There will be bread and food for the 7th year itself, and it will not be like the manna. It would actually be real food with physical bread, with all the deficiencies that they contain and the components of physical matter. It will be actual bread. It won't be anything of a supernatural level. It won't be on Mount Sinai. We'll receive the Torah. It won't be in the desert. It will be in the fields, in the vineyards, and everywhere you dwell in the land of Israel. And it says the 7th year is bound up with normal physical reality. And we can ask that the mitzvah of Shemitah is observed again, just like the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael. The mitzvah of Shemitah is observed with what we call Kabbalas Ol in the physical level, in physical food on the lowest level, meaning the physical and material level. And it's ordinary weekdays, even though Shemitah, we're resting the land just like we rest on Shabbos, but it's the days are ordinary weekdays, unlike the Shabbos where work is prohibited, or a Yom Tov. But the sabbatical year, all work is permitted, as on any weekday. It's just the work that is related to the food production of the land. And the rest is to be observed in one's ordinary affairs of the earth upon which everyone stands. And it says, I will command my blessing, meaning the panemius, the divine essence. All of this is going to come to the people of Israel through the tribe of Asher. And it says that this work of rest in honor of God can be carried out in physical manners and in a place of concealment and obstructions. Even in a place that has objections, only can you carry out what seems to be an obstacle with Kabbalas Ol. And with this level of Kabbalas Ol, you can even go into a place of darkness. And that is why in Russia, in particular, in the secret underground movement, at great risk to life, that there were Jews that were able to go forward and going forward and going forward in their trying to bring food and Torah and comfort to the Jews that had no other means to get them. So it says that this is especially and specifically Asher, which we again call the Panemius Shebaregel, that essence, inner deep essence of the foot, who can bring out and reveal the core of this Kabbalas Ol. And it says, again, to go even into the places of darkness. Why? Because they were the ones who gathered for all the camps. They conferred this quality. They were not only gathered, but they were able to confer the quality of Kabbalas Ol upon all Jews, and they supplied all Jews with food. And it says, from Asher his bread shall be fat. He dips his foot in oil. Because this aspect of Kabbalah's Ol radiated in Asher from his very root and essence. And it says, alluding to the future time when deed, meaning action, will be superior. So the Gemara is asking a question. Is the study of Torah superior to deed? Or is observing the mitzvahs superior to study? So Rabbi Tarfon argued that deed is superior, while Rabbi Akiva argued that study is greater. So I just want to give everybody who's watching one of the greatest tips that you're going to ever hear about being in Israel. Between Sfat and Meron, up in the north, is the grave of Rabbi Tarfon. And Rabbi Tarfon's grave is in, I don't even know how to describe it, on a piece of land, open land, fields. Now there's a road going up. But when I used to go years ago, there was like 250 stairs you used to have to climb to get up them. Now you could drive and park and just go on a flat road nearby, which makes it easier. And his grave stands alone, and there's an ancient olive tree that's there, and there is shade, and you see the whole range of hills and the whole area, and it is really a place of deep holiness and place for introspection, and there's never anybody there. So the grave of Rabbi Tarfon, put it on your next visit to Israel list, because you'll call and thank me. And interestingly enough, right in back of where he lives, where he lives in the other world, where his body is, there's a tiny community called Katida. Somebody will know it here. Katida. And they produce olive oil. And I one year took back 2 bottles of olive oil that totally spilt on the plane at my feet. So it says, Rabbi Tarfon argued that deed is superior, while Rabbi Akiva that study. But they're both important. We're talking here about which predominate in a person's life. So neither should be followed to the exclusion of the other. That one who devotes their life to the intellectual study of Torah is obligated to observe commandments, and the one who concentrates on practical observance of mitzvahs also must include study, because you can't fulfill you can't fulfill the commandments properly if you don't know what they are, if you don't have the knowledge. And the Gemara concludes with Rabbi Akiva that study is superior because it leads to deed. And the proper Torah student is guided by their studies in their practical applications. So I remember this story, one of my favorite stories, that a person came to a rabbi, a business person, and said to the rabbi, Rabbi, in the morning, I don't have time. I have to get out the door. I have to get to my work. It's very important. I only have 15 minutes in the morning to spare. Should I do my morning prayers, or should I study Hasidus? Which should I do? And the rabbi said to this person, you should study Hasidus, because if you study Hasidus, which is the inner nature of one's soul and God and godliness, if you study Hasidus, then you will find an extra 15 minutes to pray to God. So we know that both of these are extremely important. So there is another interesting piece. There's a lot of interesting pieces, but I want to say one more little piece, and then I want to share an amazing story and something about stories. I also want to give my little commercial that in 3 weeks, I think it's 3 weeks, for anybody who can count, if they could tell me differently, on January 27th is the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, which is the anniversary of the New Year of the Trees. And there's a custom to do what we call a Tu B'Shvat Seder, which has to do with eating the 7 fruits and species of Israel and the wines. And like you conduct a regular Seder, different, but it is called a Tu B'Shvat Seder. And a few communities, we're going to be doing a Seder together. I will give you the information. What we will do is we're going to do it earlier in the evening on Wednesday night, January 27th, in a Zoom class, and then it will be followed probably much later at night by my Wednesday night class. So probably we'll do the Tu B'Shvat Seder from 7 to 8:30, and then somewhere between 8:30 and 9, I will start my Wednesday night class that week. So I just want to get everybody excited about eating dates and nuts and red wine and white wine and really celebrating the land, because we're talking about Shemitah here. We're talking about the land of Israel. And so that's going to be coming up. Okay. So again, it says that the reward for the spiritual work of Asher is as follows. His bread shall be fat. And it says he shall produce wearers of the 8 priestly garments. So it says the daughters of the tribe of Asher were beautiful. They were married to high priests who were arrayed with 8 garments. There are 8 garments that the high priest would wear. So it says, what is the connection between the beautiful daughters and the high priests? So we're speaking of spiritual beauty, which is related to the office of the high priest. And of women, Torah says, I will make a helpmeet for him, meaning for a person in their spiritual work. And this is especially in the case of a high priest. His service on the day of Yom Kippur was in the innermost chamber of the Holy of Holies, and he had to be married, and he had to have a wife, and this was essential, and otherwise he would not be able to perform the service in the temple. And it says the true beauty of the Jewish woman is the concept, is the whole glory of the king's daughter is within. This aspect of inner and outer modesty leads to this high priestly office. And it says when a person's conduct is based on Kabbalah's all, in following the code of Jewish law, which includes this aspect of modesty on the inside and the outside, there will be many blessings from that, and even the blessings of high priests. And it says that, what do we mean by even having children that are high priests or like high priests? It says the high priest enters the Holy of Holies, which contained only the Holy Ark with the 10 Commandments. And the tablets were engraved. They weren't ink on parchment. They were engraved in the stone. And that they were a unity with the stone. Because when you have something that is written, ink on parchment, it's 2 separate things, but when you have stone engraved, it's one thing. And so it says that these high priestly children will be one with Torah. So I think I'm going to stop this particular sikha here. It does go on and on, but I want to do a few. I want to do a few more things, and I want to finish by 10. So. Why 10, since we're here all night? But I think that's enough. But everybody has permission to go away if you want. So I learned I want to do an advertisement. Chayenu. You can get this as an app on your phone, but then you can't use it on Shabbos. And it has the portion of the Torah for the day, and the Tanya for the day, and the Rambam, and other very interesting things. And I want to tell us a very interesting story I heard this week from Malka Friedman. I mean, I have so many interesting things that I prepared to teach that I see it's not going to happen. So I'm just going to do the best I can to pick a few things. So in the Chayenu, it's a story about the importance of stories. And I want to share this because I think I really enjoyed learning it. And I want to give it over before we learn this story, because stories are about teaching. They're not like, tell me a bedtime story before I go to bed. They have such depth and such resonance in them. And I think that's why people love to hear stories, because they contain so much and you can learn so much from a story. So it says that this is from a book called Likutei Diborim. It's the writings of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson. And he said he was on the road. He was on the road to Lubavitch, the town of Lubavitch in Russia, with his father. And he heard this story from his father many years ago. And it says that his father, who is also a Rebbe, said that every story should teach one a lesson in avoda, means a person's personal spiritual service, and open up one's heart and mind in knowledge. Every story should smooth out and strengthen the crookedness in one's heart. So he says that the book of Bereshit is largely composed of narratives, and it is known as Sefer HaYashar, the straight book, because its holy stories straighten out a person's heart and mind, enabling them to become vessels fit to contain Torah and their spiritual work. Every story should do something useful for the advancement of one's knowledge and their spiritual avoda in the world. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying his father told him something he heard from his grandfather, who was the Rebbe Marash. The father of the Frierdiker Rebbe was Reb Shmuel. His grandfather was the Rebbe Marash. He heard it from his father, who was the Tzemach Tzedek. And he heard it from the mouth of the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, that stories of holy tzaddikim, righteous people, that we sit and talk about and exchange, is an illustration of a verse that says, your dew is a dew of lights. For stories of this kind infuse vitality both into one's knowledge and one's avoda, one's spiritual practice. Reb Shmuel continued, rain enhances growth. The nature of water is to promote the growth of all kinds of pleasure-giving things. It improves crops that are sown and those that are planted. And the water aids the growth of fields and vineyards alike, and the rain comes in 4 forms. And he names 4 different levels of rain, including early rain and late rain, Geshen, Mata. All of these benefit only the substance of the grain and fruit harvests, but the contribution of dew is to their flavor and their nutritional value. And he goes on to say, the sages are saying, whoever makes use of the dew of the Torah revives, like resurrects them. And if one doesn't make use of the dew of the Torah does not revive or resurrect them. The stories and the informal talk that are heard at what we call a Hasidic Verbringen, those interchanges of for bringing and learning and teaching together for spiritual growth. This is not for intellectual practice. This is for spiritual growth. Are the dew of Torah, and it's a dew that gives vitality. And rain benefits the body, like we said before, of the grain and fruit harvests, while dew makes them more delicious and more nutritious. And it says, what we have said so far in praise of the stories and conversation of Hasidim has related to their innate value without particular reference to the stature of the one telling the story. What counts is the story. But the stature of the narrator of the story has its importance too. Not in as far as the story itself is concerned, but as the effect of the story is concerned. And the Frierdiker Rebbe is going on to say, when my father, Reb Shmuel, the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, is saying, when my father related something, one had to listen attentively with all 10 faculties of one's soul, noting the choice of every single letter, for every word of his was meaningful to all the 10 faculties of one's soul. I just thought that was like so beautiful. And if anybody really wants to really get a feel and an understanding of these Hasidic teachers and masters, to read the writings of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe from Likutei Deborim. They're just like delicious. They're delicious. They're just such an insight and an understanding to something that is really will uplift our souls. So I want to share a story. I've maybe somebody's asked me for the email and I was negligent in passing it on. If I don't pass on something, it means I just forgot. So try me again, okay? So I listen every week to Rebbetzin Malka Friedman, and she teaches Parsha, many other things. And this is a story she told in the middle of her Parsha class this week on, she was teaching Tamar Devorah. Might be in the Tamar Devorah class. It was right after the Parsha class. So she tells a story about a great rabbi. His name was Moshe Islis. He was called the Ramah, and he lived in the 1500s in Poland, in Krakow, Poland. And he told the following story. So he said that there was a man whose name was Moshe Truger. Truger meaning schlepper, to schlep things. Like he was a schlepper, schlep things home from the shuk for you and from the market and things like that. And he was also called Moshe Shicker. You don't have to use your imagination to guess why. He drank a lot. And his greatest joy every Friday was to take the few pennies he earned, and he would go to the tavern and he would buy some vodka, and then he would go to the mikveh and he would drink it. And then the whole Friday afternoon, Erev Shabbos, he would walk through the town yelling, Shabbos, Shabbos, Shabbos. So one day he had his pennies in his hand and he was very excited. He was just on the way. He was making a beeline towards the tavern to buy his vodka, and he sees sitting outside on a stoop a woman, Myrrell. She was a widow, and she was saying to herself, there goes Moshe Truger to buy his drink, his vodka, and I don't even have money to buy Shabbos candles. And he hears this, and it stops him dead in his tracks. And he's staring down at the money in his hands, and he only has a few pennies. And his Yetzer Tov is saying, give this to the widow for her Shabbos candles. And his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, is saying, I worked a whole week. I waited a whole week for this one drink. I deserve this glass of vodka. Go for it. And he stands there for 15 minutes and he's looking at this money in his hand because it's only good for one thing. And he closes his eyes and he goes over to Myrrell and he hands her these few pennies. And then he can't get his mashka, but he goes to the mikveh and he goes home and he lies down and he dies. So all afternoon, nobody heard him yelling, Shabbos, Shabbos, and it's Friday afternoon and people are waiting. So a few people go to his house to see what's up and they see him in bed and he's lying and he died. And they call the Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society, and it's minutes before Shabbos, and they can't bury him, and they say, we'll have to bury him on Sunday. So Saturday night, Motzi Shabbos, the Ramah is sitting in his study, and all of a sudden he feels somebody in the room, and he turns around, and he sees Moshe the Sheker, Moshe the Trugger. And he says, what are you doing here? And he says, I was sent from on high, from the higher court, to tell you that you need a rectification. You're doing for something that you're doing that's very wrong. And he says, Moshe, go home. Sleep off the drink. Come back and we'll talk about this tomorrow. And Moshe says, no, I was sent here, and he repeats the whole story. So the Ramah closes his sefer and he goes to the shul, which is right next door to his house. And he says, did anybody hear anything about Moshe Trugger? And people said, yes, he died, but there wasn't time to bury him, so his funeral is tomorrow. His funeral is on Sunday. And he goes back into his house, and he says, okay, Moshe, what do you have to tell me? And he said, it's not finding favor in the eyes of God, the manner you send people out to gather tzedakah, to gather charity around. You are only sending them to the wealthy people's house. You're not sending them to the poorer quarters, and you have to let everyone have an opportunity to give tzedakah. You must send people to every house so they can have the opportunity to give. So the Ramah says, okay, I'll do that. And he says, but answer me one question. If you died on Friday and you didn't have a funeral yet, how is it that you're already sent on a mission before? And then Moshe Trugger tells him the whole story of what happened to him on Erev Shabbos. And he says that the mitzvah of tzedakah is so great that when he got to heaven, the entrance to Gan Eden, to the Garden of Eden, was wide open for him. He didn't even have to wait a minute. And he said, that is why you have to give everyone the opportunity to give tzedakah. And by the way, you should know that Miriam, the widow, was a Gilgal, was a reincarnation of Queen Esther. And he goes on to say that when Esther came up to heaven, she was given entrance to every realm in the heavenly worlds except the realm of poverty. And she never experienced poverty, and she wasn't allowed entrance there. And she really wanted to be that full access backstage pass. And she begged to come back into the world to get entrance. So the next day, the Ramah posted on every base medrash and every shul for all the charity collectors that they must go to every single house in Krakow, Erev Shabbos, to ask for tzedakah. And that he realized that people have all kinds of problems, different problems, deformities, troubles, situations that we don't understand. And that when somebody is needing, we are obligated to make sure that that person gets. And he goes on to teach that this was similar to the story, and we learned this story in detail many weeks ago, of the prophet Ovadja, and about the prophet Ovadja, that he hid 100 prophets, 50 in 2 different caves, from the wicked king, and he fed them at his expense, and he took care of them. And when he ran out of money, he borrowed money. And he was asked, what is your collateral? And he said, I don't have anything except my 2 sons. And they said, okay, your 2 sons will be collateral. So he died, and the person holding the debt wanted the money. And he was coming to take the 2 sons. So she goes to Elisha, the prophet, and she tells the story to Elisha, and he says to her, what do you have in your house? And she says, I only have a small jug of oil. And he tells her to go knock on everybody's door and collect empty vessels, to get as many empty vessels as she can, and then to fill them up. And we know the story that she filled them till they were overflowing with oil, with olive oil. We're talking about olive oil tonight. And she was able to then sell it and have money for the rest of her life. So the question he's saying is, how could it be that when a widow knocks on your door, there you give her an empty vessel? How could it be that the neighbors gave her an empty vessel when you know that she is poor and she has nothing? You should at least fill it up for her, and then she can empty it herself if she needs it, because that is completion and holiness above and below. And we bring this story back to Yaakov, that he said he wanted to reveal the end of time. Because at the end of time, we will be pulled together and bonded together as a whole. And I just want to say, and I'm going to do one more sikha after this, but I just want to say that I used to teach a class, and I think I've said this story before, but it's connected to this, so I'm going to say it again. That I was teaching a class for many years in Beverly Hills, and it was a big class, and there were a lot of people that came to the class, and bagels and lox were served. It was very fancy foods that were served at the class. That's what brings people, food. So we had platters of food and cake, whatever. The class went on for 2 or 3 years. And I was teaching a sikha. And in this sikha, I don't remember which one it was, but the Rebbe, our Rebbe, was talking about the same concept of how can you know that your neighbor doesn't have anything and you have. And the Rebbe was saying that it's not good enough to bring your neighbor the raw foods when they have nothing, that you need to bring them the prepared foods that they need to have. And he said you should train your daughters that they should be able to see if the neighbor has nothing, and they should come crying to you, and you will be able then to help them. So that happened to be part, I think it was a Shavuos Sikha that I was teaching in the class. And at that time, just that week, one of my daughters was going to finish high school, and she was going to seminary in Israel, and almost all the girls in her class were going to different seminaries, mostly in Israel. And my daughter came home from school one day crying, and she said that there was a girl in her class that was the only girl that wasn't going because her family could not afford to send her. And she was crying that this girl can't go, and it's not fair, and there's some way that this girl should be able to go. And I said, don't worry, we'll think of something. We'll think of something. And I just told that story over in that class. And at the end of the class, somebody came up to me, and they said, how much is the tuition for the school? And I told them, and on the spot, that person wrote out a check for that girl to go, and she was able to spend the year in that school. So I'm saying, that's what it's saying here. How could you have given the empty vessels? So what's the teaching of this story is that no matter what you have, even if it's just kindness, we have to, at this time, when there are people who are struggling, and they're struggling, people are struggling for food. People are struggling for friendship, for warmth, for companionship. People's fears need to be calmed down. People need happiness and joy. And if you have that in your life, the teaching is that you really have to go and you have to make sure that you pass it on to somebody else. So I want to just conclude with a sikha very quickly. I'm not going to go into it in detail because I'm not. Okay. So it says Joseph in this parsha presented his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to Yaakov, his father, for Yaakov to bless them. And it says Yaakov placed his right hand on Ephraim, who was the younger son, and his left hand on Manasseh, who was the older son. And when Yosef saw this, he said to his father, "No, this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." And Yaakov answered him, and he said, "He will also become great, but his younger brother will become greater." And he placed Ephraim before Manasseh. So it says that the firstborn usually receives a greater blessing because there's an advantage, which we're not going to go into all the details. But it says Ephraim's level, the secondborn, surpassed that of Manasseh. It says his younger brother will become greater than he. Why was it ordained? Why was Manasseh born firstborn? Why then Ephraim should have been born firstborn? But it says that although his younger brother will become greater than he, Manasseh possessed an advantage over Ephraim, and because of that, he was the firstborn. And it says that only Yaakov's blessing emphasized a quality in Ephraim that surpassed Manasseh, and therefore he placed Ephraim before Manasseh. So it says that the word Torah is related to the word Horah, means instruction. So there's eternal lessons in this for all of us, not just for Yosef, Yaakov, Manasseh, and Ephraim. Yosef, it says, Yosef said that he maintained the advantage Manasseh possessed because he was the firstborn, and he felt that outweighed the advantage of whatever Yaakov saw in Ephraim. And it says, and Yaakov's impression was that Ephraim's level was higher, and both of them were right. So from the standpoint of Yosef, Manasseh was higher, and from the standpoint of Yaakov, Ephraim was higher. So Manasseh is the firstborn, and it says the power of his father is manifest in him more than the other sons. And Yaakov says, the two sons born to you are mine. I will consider Ephraim and Manasseh as Reuben and Shimon. And it says in this sentence, he placed Ephraim first, like Reuben was first as the firstborn, and Shimon and Manasseh second. And he made Manasseh and Ephraim two of the tribes. So it says that what was the difference between them? We can look at their names. Manasseh was given his name because it says, God made me forget all my struggle and all my father's home. And Ephraim was given his name because God made me fruitful in the land of my oppression. So it says both of these names, Joseph named them, express the feelings which the descent into Egypt evoked within Joseph. It says Manasseh reminded Joseph he was made to forget his father's house, meaning that he had this great yearning not to forget. And he had to work on himself to stay connected with his father's home. And the name Ephraim, by contrast, reflected praise and thanksgiving for making me fruitful in the land of my oppression. And he focused on the advantage and positive attributes that happened to him in the land of Egypt. So these two things represent two different directions. One is the Jews' divine service in the land of their oppression and exile. So the first is emphasis on not being affected by the surrounding environment, but by remaining in touch with his father's home. That means the situation that Joseph existed in before he descended into exile. And he reminds himself that he's living in a situation that can make him forget his father's home, and he has to have effort not to forget his father's home. The second mode emphasizes how the person's divine service concerns the land of my oppression and confronts the darkness of exile. So he's not so concerned with remembering his father's home. Instead, he's working to illuminate the darkness of the exile with the light of holiness. Again, to illuminate the darkness of exile with the light of holiness. In this week's Hayom Yom, which are little thoughts for the day, on Monday, it said, when a street lamp is erected, all those seeking light gather around, for light attracts. So these efforts he made to elevate and create a positive advantage to illuminate the darkness, to bring light into the darkness of Egypt. And it goes on to say, Ephraim's potential is considered higher because the ultimate purpose of the descent into Egypt is the descent for the sake of an ascent, to reach a position above the level that preceded the descent. And this involves not only forgetting one's father's home and making a change, but to be even higher than before they descended, to be fruitful in the land of the impression. And it says that divine service, that Manasseh comes before Ephraim, but why? Because before one can achieve within the land of oppression, which is associated with the level of doing good, one first has to make sure that they will not be affected by the darkness of exile, which means to turn away from evil. So first you have to turn away from evil, which was represented by Manasseh, and then you have to do good, which was represented by Ephraim. And it says that the descent brings out the power of the soul. And according to the Baal Shem Tov, he says, my soul thirsts for you in a parched land, so I may see you in the sanctuary. And there's another deeper purpose. It says the great descent expresses the deeper inner power of the soul that is unbounded, meaning to influence its surroundings and elevate them, to transform the darkness of exile into light. So it says exile is a catalyst, and there's a higher positive quality which the soul expresses through its divine service in exile that can make exile a positive influence. And it goes on to say, through transforming the darkness of exile to light, the soul receives a positive quality which it does not possess on its own potential. That there are a Baal Tshuva, a person who becomes a Baal Tshuva and can transform their sins into merit through love of God and sincere tshuva out of love, has an advantage that a purely righteous person doesn't have. And it says both these children of Yosef reveal different qualities. And anyway, I think I'm going to end there. So there is a lot more, but I just wanted to express that Ephraim was that taking the darkness of exile and turning into light. That is really the main thrust of what's being taught here. And just in conclusion, Barbara wants to know, what was the end of the story about the region test? So I told her I thought she should pass the girl on her regents. I can't see it as a bribe because the gift was given in gratitude for being such a wonderful teacher before the Regents. After, no one would have known, because there had never been such a hard Regent, she said, ever in all the 20 years she had ever taught. And I said, you're the teacher, and you feel that she knew the material upwards and backwards and everything, and I think she should pass. I like that level of chesed, of kindness. And interestingly enough, that girl went on to be extremely successful in life. She became the head of a I could call it a university in a certain way. So I want to say l'chaim to everybody. I had another story, but you're going to have to wait till next week. And everybody should have a beautiful week, a beautiful Shabbos. We're going into the January, into a lot of Schwartz's birthday months. I'm not going to be able to have my big, well, maybe Mashiach will do us a favor and come before my big birthday party that I have every year. And this year, we'll see what happens, okay? So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the class. And we'll learn some more next Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Okay, bye.